Welcome to World Builders Anonymous. Kick that world building addiction and actually finish that novel with your hosts Vito and John.
That was like my Toby Turner voice. I'm recording, John.
I'm recording, John.
John, I'm recording. It is me.
It's a dated
Vito.
reference now.
Yeah, and who knows what that is anymore.
I do.
Now it's all Jacksepticeye this and PewDiePie that.
Does PewDiePie even still do games? I don't know.
I don't know. That's even dated. We're so old, John. We're getting old.
I feel old.
I don't feel old.
I'm an old man.
You're having a baby.
Having a child.
You should feel old more than me.
I feel tremendously old. I feel like our youngest sister is like turning 17.
Well, that's because she is.
Right. That's how I feel so old.
Yeah, well. Anyway. Good way to start the podcast.
Yep,
Fit of
with a
coughing
little bit of
after
death.
complaining about how old we are. It's good. This is awesome.
Always high energy and very interesting at times.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone.
Well, welcome. I'm glad you made it.
Welcome. I am glad you made it too. I feel like, John, we should do kind of a little brief summary of our mission and what we're doing here, just in case there's any new listeners, because let's be honest, we've gotten some pretty good download numbers recently, and it's probably some new people who haven't listened to every single one of our episodes, as
fair.
shocking as that may sound.
Shocking.
Shocking.
Positively shocking.
Literally shocking. But yeah,
I'm
we
shook.
are... Yes. Okay.
Broke him.
Never mind. You broke me. We are a pair of brothers who are writing our novels that we've always wanted to write, and trying to break the addiction of going back and world building things over and over and over again, starting over from scratch a million different times, and never finishing a first draft, which is what seems to me, at least, the key to, well, at least not the key, but the first step of writing a novel is finishing a first draft. And I've never actually gotten there before. I've gotten pretty close a couple of times, but most of the time I get about 3 chapters in and think it's terrible and start all over and think of how my magic system should work, and never get to anything else, which is similar to how John has been in the past.
Indeed.
And so we are kind of midway through one of our probably our strongest attempt at writing a novel so far, would you say?
Certainly for me.
Yes, definitely. I've gotten more words before than this, but I'm more determined than I've ever been, and to figure out a way to finally finish that first draft and get something finished. So, yeah, that's kind of where we are right now. We are John's 8-9 chapters in. Is that right?
Working on chapter 9, and there's
Working
like
on chapter 9?
Sort of half chapter interlude thing mixed in there. So we'll call it an even 9.
Yeah. Last week I talked about I was working on solidifying what I'm doing, essentially. I have a lot of different events that I have planned, but I don't have the order quite down. I don't have the implications of those events. Some of even the specific character sort of bits in those events are a little bit up in the air still. So I've spent this week kind of trying to nail some of those down, and I was mostly successful. Right now I have the beginning pretty much down and written. The first chapter where one of the brothers comes home or gets drafted in another version, but right now he's coming home. I know, there's so many different
In
things.
version 1.
That's what I'm getting so hooked up on, yeah.
Version 7, though.
That's part of my problem oftentimes. I'll have like 3 different versions of the beginning of the story, and then it paralyzes me because I have no idea which one I want to go with, and they all lead different directions, and so I can't decide. So that's what I try to do this week, is decide how the story starts, and I finally did that and pushed through more successfully than usual. I pushed through some of that feeling of, oh, this is terrible. Oh, this is awesome. Not awesome.
Yeah, right.
Opposite of
It's
awesome.
the anti-awesome.
Oh, this is awesome. Oh, hate it. No. But I pushed through that feeling of, oh, this is awful, a lot more than I usually am able to.
Yeah.
And actually finished a chapter today, which is great. And yeah, I felt good about that. And the key really was not so much like letting it be bad, even though that's kind of what I was doing. But that's not what I was focusing on. I was focusing on putting myself in the characters' heads, I guess.
Yeah.
and really focusing on their dialogue more than anything. Because what I often get hooked up on is not dialogue. I feel pretty good writing dialogue usually. What I get hooked up on is, oh man, I started too many sentences with not too said or his father said. Should I name his father? Should I call him by his name? Should I just keep calling him his father? All this kind of stuff, like dumb stuff like that.
You get self-conscious about it.
Yeah, you get self-conscious about it, and it takes you out of the flow. And so I was able to kind of immerse myself in the characters' heads a little bit more and focus on the dialogue and let the tags and the connecting bits be whatever they were. Be whatever they were, flowing out of my fingers as I thought of it.
Yeah,
and
I'll often
that
think
was a big part of it for me.
For a given character in a like conversation, I'll think of like 4 different identifying characteristics for him. Like he's the old man, he's the tall man, he's his name, he's also that guy, or like whatever. You like have so many different ways to reference someone, so you don't feel like you're just repetitive.
Yeah, and that can be one of the messiest bits, especially in the first draft. It's seeming some of the connecting words, not the dialogue itself, but the he said, she said, the tall man said, he said gruffly, all this sort of stuff, the indicators of who's speaking or what they're doing while they're speaking.
Yeah.
Those can be really messy and distracting for me as I'm writing it, because I see what they're doing, but it takes me out of the flow to like stop and think, how can I most efficiently convey what I'm seeing in my head,
and I've
rather than what is the character actually saying to the other character and trying to get them to do.
And I've seen people and some like professional authors say, don't be afraid to just say he said. Like, don't necessarily try and make it too flowy or make it too, whatever. Like it's okay to say he said a lot as long as it's clear as speaking.
Yeah, especially in the first draft. Yeah, it's always
for sure.
We always talk about going back and fixing things. That's something that's pretty easy to fix.
Yeah,
for sure.
right.
Yeah. Anything you ran into this week in particular?
The biggest thing is actually something that dovetails off what you were saying. The hardest things for me when I'm doing this, and one thing we're doing is discovery writing for the first time. There's no overarching plot line for me to follow. So I'm, in a lot of ways making it up as I go. So I come across these crossroads, basically, where I have to make a choice, and that choice dictates a lot of things that happen in the future. And those are the hardest things for me, because I see both sides of what things could look like. So in this particular example, it's Darren, my main character, finding out about this magical artifact that he has that he doesn't know is a magical artifact. He's kind of discovering what it is for the first time, and the way I characterize what it is changes a lot about the rest of the story. And it's not the kind of thing where, I can just go and change it later. It's kind of this is how the story is going to be laid out for the rest of the thing kind of deal. And it totally stopped me, because I just didn't know what I want to do. I didn't know how I wanted to play it out, or how I wanted to make the rest of the book go, because I don't know where the rest of the book is going. So I kind of had to decide what a lot of things were going to look like later down the road. And I think I finally kind of made that decision. I talked to my wife about it, and she basically said, just start writing one of them and see if it feels right. And if it does, keep going. And if it doesn't, then you haven't really wasted much time. Like, oh, that's actually way smarter than anything I thought of, as is generally the case. So I just started writing this dream sequence for him where he kind of discovers what he's got and a little bit of what's going on. And it feels good. It feels good to be writing it. I like the direction it's going, so I'm going to stick with that for now. So not a lot of progress, but a big decision was made, and I'm pushing forward again. So that's been nice.
Nice. That's awesome. It's going pretty well. I'm having a little bit less time than I thought I would, even though I thought I would have more time this month because I moved out of my place. For those of you who haven't heard, I'm moving to South Carolina with my wife to go to flight school in a couple weeks. But yeah, first we have had to move out of our place and ship all our stuff out, and now we're staying with a friend for a few weeks. And I thought I'd be able to kind of relax and write a little bit more, but it's turned out there's a lot of stuff you got to do when you're moving literally the entire length of the country away.
It's a lot, apparently.
Yeah, so I haven't had as much time as I'd like. But this next week's going to be one of my freest weeks before all the insanity starts. So I'm going to really try to buckle down and get like a couple good chapters written this week.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah,
it feels good to...
Johnny's like, yeah, that'd be good. You've done nothing.
I'm impressed with how much I've written.
I am too.
It's been way more than I thought I could. But it's such a good feeling to kind of have a span of time where you write a lot and then you look back and you go, oh, I all this is there now. That's really neat.
Yeah, definitely. Although I have a friend who listens to the podcast, and he has rocketed past us. We need to get him on and pick his brain for his secrets of how he did it. He's got like a bunch more written than we do. I can't remember exactly the number.
People
but,
write fast, man.
Yeah,
it's insane.
Yeah, definitely. It's very interesting. I do not have the secret sauce or whatever that is, but that's the whole point of this, right?
Just pushing through it. This is one of those things that as long as you keep doing more, eventually you'll finish.
Right. Just one word at a time.
One day you might be 172, but you will finish this book.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, that wraps up that section. We also wanted to talk somewhat briefly. This is probably going to be a shorter episode than most today. We wanted to talk a little bit about another question that a listener asked. Do you want to cover that, John?
Sure thing. Same listeners last week. She gave us a few different questions, which we're very grateful for because we are always starved for things to talk about. No, not quite, but yes, at the same time. So this one is, all she wrote was writing battle scenes. And I assume that means, well, I'm going to take some creative license here. What makes a good battle scene? What does it take to write a good battle scene? What should you focus on? What should you avoid? Kind of what are the pitfalls? And to me, a lot of the same things, this breaks down to this a lot of the time. Like when you talk about romance, or if you talk about comedy, or you talk about battles, adventure, whatever you have, it comes down to a lot of the same things. And it's what are the characters feeling and seeing throughout the events. That's the key to good writing, in my opinion, in general, when it comes to fiction and character-based fiction specifically. The Battle of Helm's Deep is an amazing spectacle, but it's so much better when you're in the shoes of the people involved and you're kind of seeing things from their perspective. You're feeling the emotions of, the ebb and flow of the battle, and the implications in that particular case are dire. That's like a whole civilization that's being threatened with extinction, essentially. The whole country of Rohan is basically under threat of being wiped off the map. And so there's a lot of, tension with that because you've grown to care about these people. So a battle is never really that interesting for the battle's sake. It has a lot more to do with what's at stake. And like I said, emotions of the characters, the way they're seeing it, the way they're feeling through it. And you have to sell the battle with the consequences of it and the stakes, like I said. Is that kind of along the lines of what you're thinking?
Yeah, definitely. I remember when I would first start writing, some of my most successful in terms of word count attempts at writing were my first two. The first was like this sci-fi adventure that focused on these two like clones that escaped.
It was so good. I enjoyed that.
Oh yeah, you remember that? Yeah, totally. It was not very well structured or thought out. It was all discovery written, just kind of stream of consciousness. I got like 200 pages into it though.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun to write. I wasn't as conscious of proper technique and all those sorts of things, and I think because of that it flowed easier. But that and my second attempt, which was kind of the seed of my current attempt, very different, but a lot of the same ideas were there. Also got 150, 200 pages into that one. But both of those, I started them out very much kind of just linking battle scenes together.
Yeah, really?
Because that's what I enjoyed writing.
Sure.
I would think of the big escape scene in the beginning of the first one and basically write myself to there. And then I would think of the next kind of big... And Brandon Sanderson talks a lot about this. He thinks of his set pieces oftentimes and then reverse engineers a way to get there.
Yeah. That's not a bad way to write.
It's not necessarily a bad way to write. It can lead you to some pitfalls, though, just like anything can. But I think the pitfall that can lead you to is writing for the sake of the battle and getting to the cool stuff.
Sure. Which
is neat, and it can be cool. And I do think Brandon Sanderson's writing suffers from this oftentimes, though, of kind of cool stuff-itis. He's got a lot of cool stuff. See that. But it's like too much. It's too much cool stuff at the expense of character and stuff like that. So that can be the pitfall, because I understand how exciting it is to write, this combat scene and that kind of thing.
Right.
And we can maybe get into kind of what line by line makes a good fight scene, but in general, the focus should definitely be on, like you said, the characters, and not just like what they're feeling and thinking during the battle, but what does it mean to them? What are the stakes to them personally? Not only in the greater scheme of things, but also in each individual encounter. Because you shouldn't be showing the reader, them in this long drawn out battle with this random person we've never seen before who has no effect on anything. If you're going to focus in and really zoom in on one thing, it should really be because it's with a character who has some sort of history with this character, or defeating this sort of secondary bad guy will accomplish some goal or something like that. It shouldn't be just this is awesome. I enjoy doing this. Yeah.
Well, I think a big part of it is taking into account the advantages and disadvantages that the written word has when it comes to battles. So screen and and a movie has a huge advantage with battles when it comes to scale, like large visuals, like scope. The Battle of Pelennor Fields in Lord of the Rings is going to have a lot more punch on the screen when you see like the curvature of the earth with all these Rohirrim like charging this giant horde of orcs, right? You can't quite capture that same immensity in it with just words, I feel like. So that scope and that size is one of the big advantages that screen has, as well as large scale detail, like the individual people. You can see like the bits of armor on single people in this giant group, right? But the big thing that word has is smaller moments within that. Think the stick with Lord of the Rings when Aragorn fights Lurtz in Amon Hen, Battle of Amon Hen. That's the one.
Well done.
Got it. It's this much smaller duel, right? And in the book, I don't remember how it looks in the book.
It's actually not even in the book.
I meant to say
Lurtz
movie.
Isn't even a character.
In the movie, it's mostly a quick duel, right? You don't really know that much about Lurtz. And you're still learning about Aragorn even. And it's a quick fight. Lurtz does kill Boromir, but that's the only thing you really...
Spoilers.
It's whatever.
Yes, I'm sure there's nobody listening to this podcast who doesn't already know.
If you don't know, then you need to get out.
Yeah.
Sorry,
your nerd credit is revoked.
Please stay. But go watch it. Anyway, that moment doesn't have a ton of weight as far as that individual battle goes, because you don't really know a lot about the villain in that. When you have written word, you can get in the heads of these people so much more, and you can put a lot more weight in these smaller moments in these individual battles between two people. And that's the strength of word over screen. And so I think what a lot of people tend to do is write these huge battles because they think it's cool, and they see
it in their head and think that other people are going to see that same thing.
Exactly. They've seen Lord of the Rings, and they've seen all these movies with these big battles, and they want to emulate it. Like they want to have their own Battle of Pelennor Fields or Battle of Helm's Deep, and that's what they see in their head, and they miss what makes battle interesting in books. And that's the more personal side. That's the thing where there's stakes and there's characters and moving parts like that, and there's a level of intricacy you can get in word that you can't quite achieve in film, and that's what people want to actually see. So
that makes
keeping
sense.
that in mind is one of the most important things to me.
Yeah, and I think too it's important to realize that fights or battles can have different uses in a story. Like you could introduce a character through a quick fight scene to show that they're very proficient, or the way in which they're fighting can tell you something about them, or whether they spare the person at the end or not, or whatever. Or it can be, the big climax of the entire book, but it can be used for different effects depending on where you put it, why people are fighting, the stakes involved, the scale, the scope of it, that kind of stuff.
Sure. And you can keep it really small scale too. You don't have to have your book doesn't have to have a big battle scene just because it's fantasy. Mine's not going to have.
In fact, it probably shouldn't.
It's definitely a trope. Like the book closes on this big battle, right? And it can be very effective, but it's not a one size fits all thing. My book probably isn't going to have a big climactic battle, quote unquote, between two sides that have like a meeting in this big field and duking it out. There's probably going to be some kind of revolution, and there might be fighting in the streets between the not the royal guards, the imperial army and these rebels, but it's not going to be a real battle, because most of fighting isn't these big battles anyway. It's different, and big clashes between two sides are rarely as interesting as something like a revolution or something like these smaller things that you can really focus in on more characters. Saying 10,000 whatevers came and fought against 10,000 other whatevers and one of them won is not that interesting. But a political revolution or something along those lines can carry a lot more interest because it has more implications.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if I'll have much in the way of battles in my book yet. There's a maritime element, but my main characters are salvage divers and not like pirates or anything. They don't have weapons
Navy
on their ships.
Sailors.
Yeah, they're not really even fighters so much. There's definitely going to be some magic involved, and there'll probably be some sort of martial use of that by one of the characters, but it's mostly going to be probably to get them out of kind of scrapes that they get themselves into rather than lining up on the battlefield and charging the enemy, something like that.
Which is more interesting anyway, I think.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, battle scenes can mean small scale, not just big scale too.
And it's important to note you can make them big too. I was saying you can't keep it small and it's more interesting. You can do the big giant battles and have them be really good, but you have to kind of approach them from your own way. If it's just two sides clashing, then it's hard to be interested.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you're going to have that going on in the background, and then in the foreground is going to be your characters doing whatever they're doing, of course, yeah.
For sure.
But when you do write action scenes, insofar as you have before, John, what kind of advice do you think you'd have in terms of the line-by-line kind of how you describe things? In say, an actual hand-to-hand combat experience, whether that's with weapons or hands or whatever, but with just two people duking it out, how do you go about that?
It's hard to establish the level of detail to get into.
Yeah.
There's two temptations. One is describing every single moment. He raised his sword in a parry, and then once he'd blocked it, moved it down into a thrust, but then, and then keep going through the whole fight, and you have pages of nothing happening. And the other temptation is, and I've done this, is to do the whole battle frenzy thing where the next thing he knew, he was over here. And he didn't know how he got there, or it didn't really matter how he got there. It does matter. You don't want to just skip around and if you're going to do that, might as well just, cut and come back. Cause that's better than just some weird battle frenzy thing. There's a balance to be struck between those two things where you're describing some, but not everything. And to me, it's the best thing that I found to do is describe a fair bit, especially if it's between just two people. Describe a fair bit of what's happening, but give put consequences into things, because it's not really a thing where you're fighting for a while and nothing actually happens. People are going to get cut up, people are going to get stabbed and poked, and
especially with bladed weapons, those fights last a matter of seconds usually.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to get through an extended fight without some kind of injury. I wrote in my previous story, there's a quick fight scene between a guy with a knife and a guy with a shield, and that's all each one has. And the way one guy wins is by allowing him to get the other guy to get past his guard and stab him with the knife. That's part of his strategy, right? And so the movements that got me there included, someone getting slashed, and he's bashing the guy with the shield and breaking his nose, and every few lines something was happening that had an impact. It wasn't just parry, dodge, poke, block, stab. It wasn't just...
Yeah, there should be an ebb and flow and kind of a building to something.
And
not
consequences.
Just kind of
and bear in mind also, you can't fight for a long time without getting dead tired. Armor is heavy, weapons are heavy. You're swinging them around with all your, everything you got, and you get exhausted really quick.
Yeah, anyone who's sparred or done martial arts before knows that even barehanded, you can last just a few minutes before you're just dead, even if you're really well conditioned.
It's a lot of fantasy kind of gets unrealistic with a lot of the fighting stuff, where it just either lasts forever or everyone's really skilled, or like the main character just cuts down everyone with ease. Like one of the things with Aragon that I didn't like is once Aragon kind of made his what would you call his metamorphosis, he became a butterfly.
A literal butterfly,
basically. He was then against humans in combat. He was unstoppable, and it was no longer a thing where he had to struggle with regular soldiers.
That's part of that power creep thing, where
Yeah.
once you escalate things a little bit, you have to keep escalating them, and more and more and more. It's kind of this exponential upwards thing until it's no longer any stakes at all.
Yeah, and it's cool to have your characters as these like tanks that can take on anyone and anything at any time. But I'll just say that Aragon, pre-metamorphosis, pre-butterfly, back when he was still a little caterpillar, he was a lot more interesting of a character than when he was, a Superman person who could, cut through a guy's shield with a sword, because not only was he like unstoppably strong, his sword was also unbreakable, so he could just cut through anyone and anything at any time. Basically, he had a lightsaber, and he couldn't be killed. Like, suddenly,
except for like by a few different characters who, if they're not there at the time, takes away any sort of stakes.
Yeah, like there was no longer any tension to fight scenes because you knew he was going to be fine. He even he gave his fists an upgrade that let him punch things.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Even Roran became unkillable at some point. Like, he was suddenly a super soldier, even though he'd never even been a soldier. Like,
and that's a matter of tone, of course.
It's a matter of tone, but tension and stakes ultimately are what make these things interesting. And if you take them away, you lose me a little bit.
Definitely, yeah. A character who's vulnerable is always going to be a little more interesting than one who's invulnerable. And that's kind of delving a little bit off topic, but it's relevant.
It's involved.
Yeah. It's relevant, yeah, totally. I don't have a whole lot of more thoughts on that. I like to keep things pretty simple when I do fights. Again, back when I was doing these first couple stories, I would let them go on way too long.
Yeah,
and almost it's very obvious when something's just for the writer's own enjoyment than when it's in support of the story or something like that.
I'm sure you never read this. It was the first time I ever tried to write a book, quote unquote. I think I was like 11 or something, and I found a computer in the house and no one was around, and because I was embarrassed to be writing. I don't know why. I thought it was weird. But I wrote like this little scene in a forest where like the first thing that happens is this guy is in the forest and he's got a sword and these orcs are running at him and he just starts stabbing orcs. I remember that. Sword. You read that?
I think I did, yeah.
No,
it was pretty bad.
It was awful. And but then there was this guy and he saved the guy, and then that was the end of the first chapter. And the second chapter, I thought I was being really clever. It was like conversations in the dark or something. And
now we get character moments.
Now we're going to talk, and that's how we're going to establish these characters. They're just
that's essentially the entire problem with the Star Wars prequels. It was just either people sitting and talking or lightsaber battles, and that was no in between.
Yes, as we know, that's the best way to write narratives.
Definitely.
Oh, geez.
Learn all your tricks from Star Wars prequels, and you'll be great.
And as well as episodes 7 through 9. Those are the ones you got.
Well, we don't know about 9 yet, but
that's gonna be the same.
Probably.
It's hopeless. It's all lost.
Although, did you see the preview yet?
I don't think it looks good.
It looked okay,
no,
but the first part was dumb, where she's jumping over the TIE fighter, and she's why would you do that? Why would you attack someone on the ground in a spaceship by flying along the ground so that they can do exactly what you could have predicted they would do? Okay, let's do it.
And it's going to be okay. Okay, so I'm going to put you in the scenario, Vito, and I'm going to put it in terms that we can understand. Okay?
Way off topic, but
There's a rhinoceros, and it's running at you.
Yes.
And it's running really fast. And it probably can't turn super quickly. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And you have force speed if you wanted it, because even though you have almost no training, you're suddenly amazing. Okay? Doesn't
Just
matter.
like we were talking about. Yeah.
Doesn't matter. Okay. This is rhinoceros running at you. If it hits you, it will probably kill you, because that's how rhinoceroses work. And you're staring towards it. There's no surprise here. You're staring at it, and it's staring at you, and you're standing still. Okay. You have a few options. You can jump to the side, and it won't hit you because it can't turn. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
That's the first option. That's the one I would take, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Option 2, you stare at it and wait till it gets close to you, then you jump over it, because you can do that, okay?
Mm-hmm.
That's your second option. The third option is you turn around so you're not looking at it. That way you can surprise it.
Uh-huh.
Because that's how surprises work. And then you, with your super developed for no reason abilities, sense when it's behind you, even though you could have just looked at it. And then you just jump over it while not looking at it.
Yeah, totally.
And Rey does this. Why? Probably because she's Rey and has to do things cool, because Rey is a nonsensical character who has no reason to do anything she does, especially things related to the Force, because she doesn't actually know how to do anything. The writers decided she had to be perfect.
Well, I'll give you a parallel example. Imagine you're the rhinoceros, but instead of a regular rhinoceros, you have laser cannons and ion engines, and you are actually a spaceship that can fly.
They're actually a spaceship.
Why would you can either A, fly very low along the ground and try to ram an individual human being on the ground that you know has force powers and can probably do any number of things that are pretty crazy, or you can fly up into the air and shoot her with lasers.
Shoot them with lasers.
Shoot her with lasers. You can already hear Plinkett talking about it. Oh my gosh, yeah.
That moment in the trailer ruined the rest of it for me, because the whole time thinking...
When Luke laughs at the end, it's pretty intriguing, though, I gotta say.
What?
That's like the biggest intriguing thing is when Luke laughs at the end, that laughter at the end, that's Luke Skywalker.
I watched it without sound.
Oh, really? Yeah, there's like this maniacal, like, almost Emperor Palpatine-like laugh, but it's Luke Skywalker doing it. Like, it's like Mark Hamill, I guess.
Was it his basically he's being the Joker?
It's basically his Joker laugh, yeah, from Batman. For those of you who don't know, and I can't imagine you don't, but Mark Hamill was the Joker in the animated Batman series. But yeah, that was intriguing enough to get me like, okay.
I think they're just trying to resurrect the fact that they screwed up Episode 8.
Maybe. I mean, they are, from what I hear, going to retcon some things.
It's basically Episode 9. Okay, hot take and prediction. Episode 9 is going to be the apology tour for Episode 8. They're just going to we're sorry we screwed everything up. We'll try to fix it.
My biggest thing is like, why do you have 3 different writers, or 2 different writers, I guess, writing different episodes of the same story? Why don't you have this unified vision of the entire story before you actually
do Lord of the Rings? Write the whole thing, and then just make it.
I'm so confused by that.
This is a tangent. This is what they call a tangent.
This is what they call a very large tangent. But
we should leave before this gets more off the rails.
But something tells me we won't. I don't know.
Never mind.
Anyway,
so,
if you guys want a dedicated Star Wars episode, we will definitely do that.
There's so much. There's too much.
Let us know in the comments, even though there's no comments. Except unless you're watching it on YouTube.
Or,
which I don't know why you would, but
if you want to find us, to message us about these kind of things.
Perfect transition.
You can find us on email at wbapodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Reddit if you want to find that. I'm doing a lot of chapter critiques. People post the chapters to the Fantasy Writers subreddit.
I haven't checked that out yet. I should.
I do quite a few of them these days. It's a lot of fun. I think it's good exercise as well. And it's just kind of a good way to kind of unwind a little bit when you don't have the mental energy to write. So anyway, we're on Reddit. We're WBA_podcast. You can find us on all the social medias at I keep messing it up. You can find us on all the social medias at World Builders Anonymous. Nailed it.
I could edit that out, but I won't.
I don't even hope for that at this point. You can also go to our website, www.worldbuildersanonymous.com, where you can find all of our episodes, as well as some blog posts and more information about us. And iTunes, you can leave us a review on iTunes if you want to, but honestly, I think iTunes doesn't even matter anymore.
No, you don't think so?
No, they don't even look at... Apple doesn't care about podcasts anymore. That's another thing I could rant about, but I'm not going to.
Oh, really? I don't know anything about that. We'll have to talk about that afterwards or something.
Apple cares not about podcasts. Anyway. Maniacal overlords who want to take out the little man because they hate us.
Okay, then. Well, and with that, on that note, thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next week. Bye.
This show is sponsored in part by Audible. Visit worldbuildersanonymous.com/audible to check out what the guys are listening to right now and to receive a free audiobook.